Okay, I know the title sounds a bit harsh, but unfortunately, it is true. And before I tell you guys how history is used to fool us, let me first show you. Now to show you guys, I searched the phrase world history 16th century into a search engine, in this case Google. And now before I show you guys the results, now you tell me in the comments below, when you think about world history and you think about the 16th century, what comes to your mind? What are the major world events or the more important things that were happening in the world that pop into your mind? It can be anything, Tell me down below in the comments what comes to your mind. I'm just curious. Hi, my name is Misha and welcome to Tarihi Tales. Now, quickly getting back on topic because I'm excited about this one. Now, as this AI result tells us, the 16th century lies between the year 1500 to the year 1599. But as we scroll down, look at the rest of the results. It talks about the Renaissance, the exploration voyages of Europeans, Christopher Columbus. It talks about the Protestants. And as we go down, you'll see that all the results focus solely on Europe. But see, I never asked about European history. What I searched for was world history and what were the most significant things happening in the world during the 16th century. And now you may think that, okay, maybe anything and everything of consequence was actually happening in Europe. But see, that's where we're all wrong, where we are all fooled. This approach to the world is actually called a Eurocentric approach, which basically means that an approach centered on Europe or the Europeans, especially reflecting a tendency to interpret the world in terms of European or Anglo-American values and experiences. So, what was actually going on in the 16th century? If I'm saying that the results are giving us a Eurocentric approach, not everything and anything was not happening in Europe, then what was happening in the world, right? Now, because the 16th century starts in the year 1500, let me give you a snapshot of the same year in terms of what the world looked like at that time, what the map of the world looked like. We have the Inca and the Aztec Empire. We have the Ming Dynasty in China. We have the Safavids and the Mamluks in the Middle East and Africa. And the biggest and the most significant empire of the time, we have the Ottomans, right in the heart of the Mediterranean, also uncomfortably reaching into Europe. But see, now looking at those names, you might think, well, all of those names sound quite significant, right? But wasn't it convenient how Google just forgot to mention any of those things which were going on in the world right in the beginning of the 16th century and went straight to Europe? And now you may think, well, you know what? Or you may think that, they were very backwards and nothing really important was coming out of there even during the 16th century. Maybe that's why we're given the search results that we're given. In the Eurocentric approach towards history, this is exactly the kind of picture that is painted. And it couldn't be further from the truth. During that time, during the early 16th century, and for a couple of centuries, and for a lot of years before that and after that, the Ottomans were actually the most advanced and the most progressive empire throughout the world. And it was the hub of everything that was going on in the world at that time. And no, don't just take my word for it, because as I do in all my videos, I'm not a historian, right? I gather all this research based on the works of actual historians who have spent years and years researching and studying specific fields. And in this case, a historian by the name of Mikhail, who is also a professor and the chair of the history department in Yale University. Now, we all know Yale University, right? It's the one that is talked about synonymously to Harvard or any other big major universities out there. So this historian is not just any historian, he's the head of the history department of Yale University. And he wrote a book which is called God's Shadow. It's a fantastic read, I highly recommend it. And it is in that book that he mentions, and I quote, "For half a century before 1492, now just to give you some context, 1492 is the year Christopher Columbus accidentally landed in the Americas, okay? So he's using that as a benchmark. For half a century before 1492 and for centuries afterwards, the Ottoman Empire stood as the most powerful state on earth, the largest empire in the Mediterranean, since ancient Rome. And he also says, in the decades around 1500, the Ottomans controlled more territory and ruled over more people than any other world power. He talks about how the Ottomans actually had a monopoly over the trade routes of the world because they controlled the Mediterranean, and that was where all the major trade routes were kind of going in and out of. They also had the most superior military as well as the naval forces. And it was all of this pressure and this blocking out of Europe from the rest of the world. They weren't able to trade because of the Ottomans. It's all of this that actually pushed the Europeans to kind of go and find other routes. But like we're taught that, Europeans, they wanted to discover, they were people who were just born explorers. No, they were not. They were desperate. And Alan Mikhail does a really good job of kind of making this point throughout his book, and he has solid evidences. I mean, you can go and read more about it if you want. It's amazing. Now, these famous people included people that we now think of as explorers, like Vasco da Gama, like Christopher Columbus. And in the case of people like Christopher Columbus, there's actually amazingly strong evidence. He wasn't really going out just to look for trade routes. He was desperate to do something for the Christians, and he was desperate to kind of gain some kind of victory over the Muslims. And when I say we find evidence about all of this, I mean that there are letters and diaries that are written by Christopher Columbus where he's talking about all of this himself. But conveniently, when we're taught history, all the religious aspects and the desperation and what the real situation was of the world at that time is left out of the picture. It's painted as though those people just had a drive for exploration that the rest of the world did not have, and they wanted to explore. No, that is how we're fooled, okay? So even the discovery of the Americas by the Europeans, not generally, is actually a direct or an indirect result of the Ottomans, because Columbus himself in his lifetime was very, very influenced by the Ottomans, and there is strong evidence about it. I'll talk more about this at the end of the video. Now, Alan Mikhail further says, the ineluctable fact is that the Ottoman Empire made our modern world, which is admittedly a bitter pill for many in the West. He also talks about why it's so difficult for the West to give credit to the Ottoman Empire for all of the things that it did, where credit is due. Well, something similar in the 21st century and back in the 15th, 16th centuries was the fact that Muslims and Islam was kind of viewed as this threat, as this other, this foe that kind of needed to be defeated. And I'm saying that there's a similarity because even today it is a bit of a fact that Islamophobia exists, and things like terrorism are associated a lot more with Muslims than they are with white people. Now evidence that even then they thought of Islam as their ultimate enemy kind of comes from small things, and he talks about how you can see this fear in the smallest of things. And he gives a really good example of this very small town which is located at the very border between Mexico and Texas, and the town is called Matamoros. Now, mata comes from the Spanish verb matar, which means to kill, while moros is the Spanish equivalent to the English word Moors. The word Moors is a derogatory term which was used for Muslims for a very long time, and Moros is just a Spanish variant of it. So think about it. When these first Europeans landed accidentally in the Americas and they found some areas, and anybody they met who they thought was not them, right? Automatically, they thought of them as Muslims because they named a town as Muslim Slayer, as Moor Slayer, which basically means Muslim slayers. So you can see how embedded the threat of Muslims was in their mind that when they're faced with unknown people like the Native Americans, they automatically assume that they must be one of them. Now let's circle back towards the search results in the start. And we found that the search results also talk about it as the rise of the West, and terms where they're saying that, this was something significant happening for the West. But see, a lot of historians actually agree upon the fact that the West was never a thing. During the 16th or even the 17th century, the concept of a united West is such a recent one. It's so recent. But because we live in an age where they are the recent winners of various wars, they control the narratives. And they would have us believe that, well, West was always a thing. We always were like this. But the reality is that during the 16th, 17th centuries, and if you go further back, it gets further worse, Europe could best be described as small, disparate states which were at constant war with each other. And the interesting bit is that, and during this time period, the Ottoman Empire actually held more territory in Europe than any other European state. So now think about what was the West at that time. It was nothing. They were individual states. This concept that these movements were happening in the West, these are very recent creations. And this is exactly how history kind of skews our vision. So basically the notion of the West is a very recent one, and it was created for precisely this reason, that normal people like us, everyday people, would think that the West was something great. There was a lot going on there. But in reality, it's like a modern creation, which loosely kind of also falls into propaganda. And boy, did we fall for it, We all really picked up on all those pieces of history and embedded them into ourselves. Even I did for the longest time until I learned to research more. And if you're thinking, well, you're saying all of this based off of one historian. No, I'm not. There are a lot of other historians that talk about the same things. And this Eurocentric approach is also kind of opposed and is also kind of discussed by other historians, such as a very famous example I'll give you, Peter Frankopan. This is his book, The Silk Roads. And the first time I read this book, I was in university, and it was the very first history course I ever took. And our professor especially made us read the preface. And now I know why, because it really made an impact on me even then. The entire thing is a bit long, so I'm not going to be reading the whole preface. You can do that if you want, and I'll give you a link in the description box of an online link where you can read the preface for free. But I'll read you a part of it so you understand what he's talking about. Now, basically, he starts with saying that he had a big map in his room when he was a kid, and he loved geography, and he loved to learn the names of places and mountain ranges and different countries. And then he says, and now I quote, "By the time I was a teenager, I had become uneasy about the relentlessly narrow geographic focus of my classes at school, which concentrated solely on Western Europe and the United States, and left most of the rest of the world untouched. We had been taught about the Romans in Britain, the Norman conquest of 1066, Henry VIII, the Tudors, the American War of Independence, Victorian industrialization, the Battle of Somme, and the rise and fall of Nazi Germany. I would look up at my map and see huge regions of the world that had been passed over in silence. For my 14th birthday, my parents gave me a book by the anthropologist Eric Wolfe, which really lit the tinder. The accepted and lazy history of civilization, wrote Wolfe, is one where ancient Greece begat Rome, Rome begat Christian Europe begat the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, political democracy, and the Industrial Revolution. Industry crossed with democracy in turn yielded the United States, embodying the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I immediately recognized that this was exactly the story I had been told, the mantra of the political, cultural, and moral triumph of the West. But this account was flawed. There were alternative ways of looking at history, ones that did not involve looking at the past from the perspective of the winners of recent history. It gets even better as you read it on, because then he talks about all the different views, the world views that you can see when you read more history. And it gets even better. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I'll put a link in the description box if you want to read the entire thing, okay? So I hope I'm kind of able to explain what I was getting at with this video, because this is one of the reasons why I even started this channel. Because for the longest time, even I bought into all the historical, the story that we're told, the the West, everything. And it was a lot later in life where I realized that, well, I think I've been kind of mistaught. And I realized how many people around me are mistaught. And however insignificant, I wanted to play a part in kind of helping people understand how to research history, how to learn more. That's why I give all my sources and everything in the description box of each video so that you guys can read up on it more, find out for yourselves. Don't just take my word for it. And circling back to the point about Christopher Columbus, I said I'll talk about it at the end of the video, right? So I actually have an entire video where I talk about all these things that, Mikhail was talking about, and then I did some further research about Columbus, and the fact and the conclusion a lot of historians have kind of come to is the fact that Christopher Columbus was not an explorer. He was a crusader, and he says so himself. So who are we to kind of, be like, no, you're an explorer? And I know it sounds silly, but here's a video that I made, which was one of the first videos on my YouTube channel. But it talks in great detail about this entire thing. So if you're interested, you can have a watch, right? And let me know what you think about this video as well. See you guys next time. Bye.